The story you're about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts about historical characters, events, or locations. Please sit back and listen as I narrate this story to you. Before meeting a disastrous and shockingly ironic end, Jewish gangster Arnold "the Brain" Rothstein developed a criminal empire based on drug and alcohol trafficking. Rothstein, dubbed the Brain for his devious plans, developed a Jewish mafia empire based on gambling and drugs. Arnold Rothstein rose to prominence as a loan shark and gambler before moving into the world of liquor and narcotics and becoming a kingpin of organized crime during the Prohibition era. Rothstein is accused of helping to rig the 1919 World Series, in which certain Chicago White Sox players accepted bribes to throw the game to the Cincinnati Reds. He was never convicted. In November 1928, he was shot and killed while playing poker. Rothstein was born in New York City on January 17, 1882, to a prominent business family. Indeed, his family's reputation was hilariously at odds with the one he would establish for himself. His philanthropic father, Abraham, was known as Abe the Just, and his older brother, Harry, had become a rabbi. Rothstein, on the other hand, took a completely different course. While Rothstein's father was a true American success story, laboring in New York City's garment district and avoiding shady transactions on his way to become a prosperous businessman, young Arnold Rothstein gravitated towards the risky. At the age of 16, Rothstein visited his final classroom. He worked as a traveling salesman for a while, but when he began hanging out in local pool rooms, he was drawn to a life of crime. Rothstein began by gambling and lending money to locals, but it wasn't long until he had made friends with a number of high-ranking politicians, business people, and criminals, many of whom were also Jewish by birth. He went to illicit gambling dens and even pawned his father's jewelry to earn money. Rothstein attempted to avoid his father's legacy and tradition in every way he could. His contacts put him in an unusual position, somewhere between crime and the law, and he started working as a fixer, smoothing over the rough ties between those who broke the law and those who swore to uphold it. During this time, he also became a gambling legend, collecting winnings that earned him the nickname Big Bankroll and the habit of carrying a big wad of $100 bills. Rothstein is said to have rigged the majority of the games that resulted to his victories, and he backed up this claim by saying that he'd wager on anything but the weather because he couldn't control it. In 1907, Rothstein fell in love with Carolyn Green, a showgirl. Green, who was just half Jewish on her father's side, was deemed unsuitable by Rothstein's Orthodox parents. To make matters worse, the showgirl refused to convert to Judaism as Abraham Rothstein had desired, prompting him to announce that he no longer had a second son who would break Judaism's standards by marrying outside the faith. Rothstein and Green married at Saratoga Springs, New York 2 years later. He was not the best spouse in the world as you might expect. In reality, he was a complete disaster. He banned Green from continuing her work in the theater while he was free to go out on a regular basis to do his gambling business and maintain a slew of extramarital affairs. By the early 1910s, Rothstein had amassed a sizable fortune, and he had constructed a Manhattan casino and invested in racetracks, propelling him into the big leagues. By the age of 30, Rothstein had amassed a fortune and was planning even bigger schemes, one of which would make him famous. The Black Sox scandal was Rothstein's most famous plot, which he pulled off in 1919. The World Series, probably the most popular sporting event in the United States, pitted two baseball heavyweights, the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds, against one another that October. Professional gamblers had offered certain White Sox players large sums of money if they would win the World Series. The plan was simple. They'd gamble against the Red Sox and then profit when they lost on purpose. But this was a case that could only be solved by the uber gambler himself. The White Sox players agreed to lose the World Series when the Brain lent his financial backing to his gambling underlings. Rothstein allegedly won $350,000 after placing a $270,000 wager on the Reds to win. Unfortunately, Everyone noticed that the White Sox were playing so poorly that it appeared as though they were deliberately attempting to lose. The team was under increasing pressure to confess, and by 1920, the players had admitted to taking bribes. The 8 White Sox players in issue, called the Black Sox because of their soiled reputations as well as their bribers, were prosecuted. They never again played a professional baseball game. Despite this, no one has ever been able to directly accuse Rothstein of being involved in the controversy. Rothstein, ever clever in his schemes, got away with it because he kept his hands clean and angrily denied any involvement in the affair. Rothstein purchased a thoroughbred named Sporting Blood under the alias Redstone's Table, which won the 1921 Travers Stakes under dubious circumstances. Rothstein is accused of conspiring with a well-known trainer, Sam Hildreth, to inflate the odds on Sporting Blood. On the morning of the race, Hildreth entered an exceptional 3-year-old gray lag, leading Sporting Blood's odds to increase 3-1. Rothstein placed a $150,000 wager with bookies after learning that the second favorite, Prudery, was sick. Hildreth scratched Gray Lag from the starting lineup without explanation just before game time. Rothstein won almost $500,000 in bets and the purse, but there was never any proof of a conspiracy. Rothstein, like many other criminals, saw the prohibition of alcohol in 1920 as a good opportunity to make money. Rothstein was one of the first to get involved in the illegal alcohol trafficking business, assisting in the importation and transportation of booze across the country. He organized the movement of booze from Canada to the United States via the Hudson River and the Great Lakes. Rothstein quickly established himself as one of the titans of the illegal alcohol trade, alongside kingpins like Al Scarface Capone and the aforementioned Lucky Luciano. Waxy Gordon, sometimes known as Irving Wexler, was a key figure in Rothstein's bootlegging operation. Wexler controlled the majority of Rothstein's bootlegging operations on the East Coast, raking in millions of dollars each year. We can only imagine how much Rothstein was making from his unlawful transaction if Waxy was making this much. Rothstein, despite his apparent success as a bootlegger, was dissatisfied. His voracious desire for cash eventually drove him to engage in the illegal drug trade. He began importing heroin from Europe and reselling it for a profit across the United States. With cocaine, he did something similar. As a result, many analysts consider Rothstein to be the first successful modern drug dealer, long before the era of prominent drug lords like Pablo Escobar. This business proved to be far more profitable than bootlegging, and Rothstein rose to become America's drug kingpin. Rothstein was the financial overlord of the American narcotics trade by the mid-1920s, and he employed some of the most renowned mobsters of the time, including Frank Costello, Jack Legs Diamond, Lucky Luciano, and Dutch Schultz. However, Rothstein's high times came to an end when he entered a 4-day poker game at Manhattan's Park Central Hotel. In an ironic turn of events, the master of game fixing became involved in what seemed to be a rigged poker game. Titanic Thompson and Nate Raymond, a pair of gambler mobsters, allegedly manipulated the game, leaving Rothstein owing them $300,000. Rothstein refused to pay up after realizing he had been duped. After receiving a suspicious phone call on November 4, Rothstein headed to a meeting at Manhattan's Park Central Hotel. He staggered out an hour or so after wandering inside the hotel, mortally wounded by a .38 caliber handgun. Rothstein died in hospital 2 days later. Following the gangster code, Rothstein refused to identify his assailant. Authorities suspected George McManus, the man behind the infamous poker game, but no one was ever found guilty of the murder. Despite shunning his family's beliefs for much of his life, Rothstein was given a proper Jewish burial. Arnold Rothstein was one of the first to treat his criminal activities as carefully planned business transactions. According to one biographer, Rothstein is considered as the pioneer major businessman of organized crime in the United States. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took time out of your day to listen to my narration. This is Nikki of Twysted Mind, and I'd like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Salamat!